Muy buenas tardes. Hola, hola, hola. Gracias. Okay. Muy buenas tardes. Thank you very much to Global Justice Now and Nick Galvin for the very kind invitation. And muchísimas gracias a la ministra de Medio Ambiente de Colombia, muy respetada, Irene, muy querida. Bien, muchas gracias a toda la mesa y a toda la audiencia. Thank you very much for everybody who is attending this conference. My name is Raúl Gabriel Benet, and well, I will be presenting a particular case in which, the Colombian government as well know very well that kind of thing because we share that problem between Mexico and Colombia and Mexican. First of all, I need to say that the countries cannot fulfill the Paris Agreement nor the national determinant contributions while we remain bounded to the investor-state dispute settlement mechanisms, the ISDS mechanisms. We cannot fulfill, the countries in the global south are bound to this system, and that imposes, and it is a reality. It's not only something like we feel that it makes it difficult, but we are facing it in a very rude manner, how the companies are really suing the countries, in particular my country, Mexico, for issues that are absolutely mandatory from the Paris Agreement and from the point of view of our national determinant contributions. The Paris Agreement asks us to protect ecosystems, to reduce emissions, to defend biodiversity, guarantee a just transition, and to observe and to respect communities. All of that is in very concrete manner opposed by the mechanisms that are signed in the free trade agreement that we have, in particular with the United States and with Canada. It's brutal, believe me, how it works. We have many cases. Mexico is the third country in Latin America with number of demands, the fourth in the world. Most of them, 90%, come from companies from the United States and are related to the free trade agreements that we have signed, or Mexico has signed with the United States and Canada since 30 years ago now. So the case that I want to present to you and to comment with you has many issues that might be interesting from the point of view of how these mechanisms work against communities, against the environment, and mainly against the climate. There is a company, is the giant of asphalt in the United States. It's Vulcan, is the name of it. It's a giant, and it is growing fast. And one of their main sources of material comes exactly from the Caribbean, from Mexico, from a very, very pretty place in the world that is the Caribbean, the Mexican Caribbean. There is where this mine has their main, not the main, but one of their main sources of material. They sell it for roads, for airports, for hospitals, for headquarters, military headquarters in the United States. Is the biggest company of asphalt in the United States, and obviously is politically very, very, very powerful. Cement and that kind of materials that, when they are so big, so huge, are very much related also with power, and that is the case. No? So this company came to Mexico around 35 years ago, or a little bit more, and they got the land in a very corrupt way. It was what we call tierras nacionales, national lands. That is a very particular way of land right in Mexico. It belongs to us, to the citizens. And in a very corrupt way, they got the land because it is possible to buy it. Well, it was possible, now it's not that easy, but it was possible to buy it. And then they were, for instance, in this process in which they got the land, they had the person who was the responsible, the chief of the company, the consejo, the administration manager of the company, became the main advisor of the president in 1996 to 1990 to the 2000, and that's the way they moved decrees, they moved protected areas, they moved laws, so they got the permit. The permit is very, very corrupt. What's that the origin? I could talk a lot about the corrupt origin of this, but then they got an environmental impact assessment authorization very easy because they just really gave it, but it had some conditions, and all those conditions were violated systematically by the company during the last 25 years. The last 20 years, because it has been closed for 4 years now. Vulcan, the name of the mine in Mexico is Calica. We know it as Calica, but the company in the United States is Vulcan. Well, so after the first 25 years, it was supposed to get into an end, the first authorization. They were supposed to be allowed to get another authorization if they observed all the conditions, but they didn't observe any one of them. So well, they didn't get the new authorization. It's important to say that during all these years we have been struggling. The community, when I mean me, around the mine, has been trying to sue the mine for health issues, for environmental issues, for human rights issues, for many things. It was not possible, but until 2011, which is when the constitution changed, and we were able to file a class action. We didn't have class actions before. So then we began to get organized. When we tried before that, only recently we were recognized as, or we were allowed in the national system to file a class action. This is important because the company, well, I need to say that the company was, the mine was closed by the Mexican government after mobilizations, community mobilizations, and after the Ministry of Environment and the Authority for Environment found that it was really, really violating all the Mexican laws, and then they were closed, una clausura, closed, well, they were legally closed, and then they filed against Mexico in this inside the World Bank, in this mechanism. The World Bank, we call it in Spanish CIADI. It's this mechanism, the tribunal in Washington, in which a group of attorneys that are private attorneys are appointed to evaluate what is going on. And then so this company filed a demand against Mexico, that is the amount is several times the amount that, for instance, we devote, or the Mexican government has, for all the protected areas, for all the vigilation all around the country. It's almost all the budget of the Ministry of Environment, if we don't consider water, because water is part of the ministry, but it's huge. So the amount of money that is around $2,000 million, those millones, $2,000 million, that's what they are suing Mexico. No? So the reasons they claim, one of them is that the Mexican government expropriated their land. That is absolutely false. Even when the origin is very corrupt, the Mexican government is respecting the ownership, but the Mexican government put some restrictions, and they consider that an expropriation, an indirect expropriation. In Mexico, we don't have that in the law, but they claim that Mexico or that our country expropriated the mine. But then there are other reasons that are worse than that. One of them is that the Mexican government was not using the force against the communities as it was supposed, and it says it there. I cannot believe. I was not believing it. How it says there in the demand and in the attractive and the agreement that the company can sue Mexico because Mexico is not applying the law or the force. It says force against the communities because they are defending their territory. So it's incredible. The amount of money is a lot, but also it has very political. In many ways, it's not only an economic and technical issue or a legal issue; it's also a very political issue. In the United States, it's been debated, that particular case in this moment on Monday, next Monday. A group of Mexican people will be presenting in Washington in a hearing the issue, because we are demanding that the Congress in the United States eliminate these mechanisms. We are allied there with Elizabeth Warren, who is a congresswoman and activist against this kind of mechanisms. We have Quetzal Saab, an indigenous Maya leader in this moment here. He is now in Washington, now while I'm here making this presentation. Okay, so the fact is that the Mexican government has been discussing in this moment, negotiating a new round of a trade agreement with the United States, as many other countries in the world, with the situation that we are facing that from Mexico is really, really, really tough, really brutal, because, well, you know, the Mexican economy has been tied badly to the American economy, or North American economy, and now it's very difficult to separate of that. No? So in this new round of negotiations, the US and the very big companies, there is a round table of the richest companies in the world that made a round table just last month. And in that round table, they demanded the United States government to impose a strong clause on these issues. So it's terrible. They have the communities have suffered badly. The environment, they went many meters below the water level, or in a place that is very, very, very sensitive for the kind of soil and the biodiversity there. The people, the water was badly polluted, and the people showed that, well, you know, every kind of diseases related to this thing. And we cannot defend. The Mexican government say us, you know, and we somehow understand it, you cannot be talking about, the Mexican government doesn't want to talk about the issue because they don't want to put in risk the trade agreement with the United States. So they are, that's how it becomes a political issue. It's not only a technical or legal issue, no? So, well, that I hope I have presented a picture. Well, I told you that we filed a class action in Mexico, and something that might be interesting for some of you that are interested in this kind of mechanisms. This class action was filed as an amicus curiae at the tribunal in Washington. We were able to do that. We succeed in doing that, and that's something that is very strange. Normally, these kind of tribunals do not hear at all the communities, but the company lied to the tribunal, and they got a little bit angry because they said that they were not any community around the mine. So they claimed that the mine, the company claimed in front of the tribunal that there were any communities around there. So the community, we heard that, we saw it, and then we demonstrated, we made many demonstrations, and then the community nominated Quetzal Saab and myself to go to Washington and present our class action as the content of an amicus curiae. And very, very strange because, well, we didn't know because we are not experts in the issue at all, but now we know that this is really a strange case. So it's something to study, it's a study case. So, well, I hope that I gave you a picture of what is going there, what's going on there. It's absolutely mandatory for us as country, as communities, to stop this kind of mechanisms are really abusive about our countries, our communities, our environment, and is really an enemy of the climate, because we cannot adhere to our commitments because we know we are going to be sued. Now that they are discussing this new trade agreement, that is something that we really are struggling not to sign from Mexico. No? Well, I hope you find this clear. Sorry for my English, that is really tortuous. Sorry for that. But thank you very much, and I will. Gracias.
Really clear and interesting Amigos, colegas, friends, thank you very much for this invitation. I think it is a subject that comes in a very timely moment and in a very special place as well, because we are talking from the heart of the Amazon, and we are also talking from a place that has taught us what revolution is about and how much we have to fight in order to get justice made. So I am going to talk from the perspective of Colombia and sharing a little bit of our position and some of the cases that have been very pressuring to the Colombian state. For Colombia, advancing a just energy transition is not only about changing how we produce energy, it is about how we relate to nature and how we make a harmony between nature and a new economic model, a model that is carbon-free. And it needs the restructuring of power relationships, because it hasn't been easy to push this particular model in Colombia, as it is not easy to do it in other places. But particularly in Colombia, we have the challenge of pushing this model in a context in which Colombia has been dependent on the fossil fuels and its exports. So transforming those structures are a part of the challenges that we are still facing, and it needs to overcome extractivism, which is what this government has been trying to do in the last 3 years. One of the greatest obstacles to do this transformation is the investor-state dispute settlement system, the ISDS. Because this mechanism that has been inherited from an era in which the priority was investment over sovereignty, allows corporations to sue the state for adopting legitimate environmental and climate policies. For a country such as Colombia, with significant foreign investment in oil, gas, and coal, this has created a tangible financial risk that exposes, first of all, a clear inequality between North and South, because we know that we are less, not less willing, but less powerful, economically speaking, to decide to skip or to step out ISDS. Secondly, it exposes inequality between corporate and state powers, because states are also has less money, less time, less institutional settings, and less money to pay good lawyers in order to defend from corporations. We see it as a constriction to national sovereignty and as a mechanism of financial coercion that turns into political domination, because at the end, what is being imposed are decisions that we end up taking because it is very difficult to assume or to stand the economic decisions that are imposed to us. ISDS also generate a regulatory chilling effect. Governments hesitate to act for the fear of being sued. But no state should have to choose between protecting nature, protecting people, and protecting itself from arbitration. Defending our páramos, for example, in Colombia, or our Wayuu communities in the Guajira and the Cesar, or our rivers, our forests must never be punished. Colombia's experience proves what is at stake. In Santurban, for example, which is one of the most amazing páramo ecosystems, very unique to the Andes region, our country successfully defended the right to protect this particular ecosystem. However, the victory, we had a victory, but we had to pay a big price for that victory. A big price in terms of financing the legal case, and also all the time that we had to invest in order to win the case. We have at least 23 ISD cases open at the moment, and that have been open in the last 10 years. And we have at least 280 more possible cases that could open in the next decade if we want to take actions to protect our ecosystems and our people in the climate crisis and climate action decisions that we want to take. One other case that has been very relevant is the one in Cerrejón. It's the largest coal mining area in Latin America, and we have been sued by the company 4 times in the last 10 years. And it is very demanding in terms of defending, but it's also very difficult to explain to the communities that we cannot do more because maybe another sue is going to take place. So it also makes us part of a conflict, or it increases the conflict, the environmental conflicts that happen in these areas. This is the paradox of ISDS. States can win legally and still lose economically. That's why to achieve a truly just transition, we must reduce these legal cases and the financial barriers to take climate action. Protecting our people, our workers, our ecosystems, our territories from the impacts of fossil fuel and coal mining dependence also means to protect the state to regulate in the public interest. I think this is what is at stake, that we need to make sure that the states are free enough to be sovereign. What is a state if it cannot exercise sovereignty? So from Colombia, from this government, the message is clear. We are calling for a global conversation to reform the investment regime in line with climate justice and with human rights. And that's why we celebrate very much global justice now, because we think it has to be now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all of the panelists. So we've heard all the way through this, all of the
presence of ISDS in trade treaties has right through from the community level to the ability of governments to make decisions on behalf of their people and on behalf of their ecosystems they're protecting. So we have some time left now, so we'll go to questions or some discussions on the floor. So if you want to pop your hands up if you have any questions. One at the back.
Hello, Maria. I want to ask you, like, how practically the European Union would withdraw the treaty agreement on ISDS. How practically was this realized? And the second question is how the ICJ could help to develop this capacity from the ISDS. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take another question and maybe the third one.
Thank you so much. I'm Alexandra, I'm a journalist from Germany. I'm focused on climate law and Latin America and Colombia. So my question would go to the Minister in days. You announced, I believe it was yesterday, a fossil-free Amazonian region in Colombia. And we heard about the study which was released, I think it was a week ago, or at the beginning of this week, which kind of made it show the data of many possible fossil fuel projects in Colombia being kind of protected by ISDS. So my question would be, don't you expect some kind of backlash, or put it the other way, how are you going to put through the fossil fuel free Colombian energy sources with this threat of ISDS moving in the background? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Is there any more questions for this particular round? Okay, now welcome to the panel. And for the question about Europe, treaty agreement, I think that might be clear.
And something to add as well, but in terms of how, it was a huge amount of public pressure over many, many years from citizens of Europe. And I think that pressure started, the focus on ISDS started in terms of our concern, our solidarity concern with the communities that have been spoken about here in the global south. But as I say, I think it was about 10 years ago where we started to see these cases being brought to Europe too. And of course that allowed us to make a much broader argument to the European public about climate action and frankly about sovereignty. And really, it was when those cases became public in countries that you saw just a huge switch of opinion in countries. Because, look, I think, and this is one of the reasons we wanted to bring this issue here to the top, where when you talk in trade and investment seminars, conferences, summits about this kind of thing, they kind of shift. There's an assumption this exists and why you're complaining about it, it's already existing. I think when you bring it to anybody else, we're absolutely horrified. I mean, they probably believe it exists. And you know, when I've been around here talking to candidates as well as participants, you know, there's just a kind of disbelief at first that such a thing can be allowed to exist in the world. And you know, so bringing this to climate campaigns, bringing it to people who care about environmental protection, I think has been absolutely key to us being able to bring the argument in Europe. What we now need to do is say, of course, it is not simply enough. If we care about climate change, it's not enough simply to limit this system in Europe. We have to limit the system globally. And I think there's something really important there, and Eliza, you were a special rapporteur who sat on with us today, brought up in our session yesterday, which is that many Western governments, my own included, they see the concerns around this. Of course, they don't want to assume because of policies that they're taking at home, but they don't fundamentally understand the problem with an investment system that was created to give far too much weight to investment interests and far too little weight to any other interests that we may have as citizens of our countries. But that's at the heart, right at the heart of the investment system. And because they don't see that, what they're trying to do is tweak ISDS as little as possible so that they stop getting sued, but the rest of the investment system stays in place. And what Eliza was saying yesterday is, no, in a world where we are trying to limit climate change, in a world where we're trying to stand up for human rights, everything else that we care about, that's not enough. We need to fundamentally rethink how our investment system works and change the objectives at the heart of it.
Just to be technically accurate, I think we were talking about two specific exits. One of the energy charge treaty, which is a diabolic, to say as it is, treaty, started after the fall of the Soviet Union to protect the European investments in East Europe. That was born in 1991. And they said, okay, we have ISDS anyway in our BITs, let's use it for protecting the investments energy in East Europe. So that's the one that the EU exited in 2024, and after years of civil society organization, technical something. But I also mentioned a different one, which I think is much more relevant for this particular panel, and that is that the EU Court of Justice declared that all of the intra-EU BITs didn't become named. And this is what I'm going to explain to you, because this is key. So what happened is, there is an insurance company called Acmea, and that happens to be Dutch. In Slovakia and the Netherlands signed a bilateral investment treaty in 1991. Now, Slovakia opened the market to insurance companies, health insurance companies, and all sorts of insurances. Acmea, being Dutch, went there, invested, and sometime later, Slovakia said, no, this is too problematic, this is increasing the prices that our Slovakian people are paying, so we are not going to let you actually compete just without any regulation. So they started capping the profits insurance companies could make, and guess what happened? Acmea sued under the ISDS clause in the Dutch Slovakian BIT, Slovakia, and guess what? ISDS, the the court in Washington said, yes, Acmea is right, so Slovakia, the government has to pay Acmea. The Slovakia then said, well, this is ridiculous, because I'm a southern country, I can regulate my market, and then they appealed, they went to the EU Court of Justice, and guess what? The EU said, yeah, actually, we shouldn't be having these cases here, because we have different ways of dealing with dispute settlements for investors. So, there was a whole political war inside the EU, and everybody said, okay, let's just get rid of the BITs. Political will. It happened because the European Justice, Court of Justice said, this is not okay under our own law. And then they can make the BITs. And this was announced in 2021. And remember that I mentioned something called the sunset clause. Many of these BITs say that even when it's terminated, from the moment it's terminated, any investment made before the announcement of the termination is protected depending 5, 10, 15 years. They unilaterally, in good faith, I don't remember the legal term, but in good faith, decided that all of the sunset clauses of the BITs being terminated also were neutralized, which basically meant they are no longer. So it's possible.
Thank you. On to the next question. Thank you very much for the question. I think the question exposes the paradox, because the Colombian government is taking a very bold decision, very brave. It's the first government in the Amazon region to take this kind of decision to stop extractivism, to protect the biome, to make sure that the Amazon is going to continue being the lung of the planet, that we are contributing to the climate equilibrium through protecting our most important forest ecosystem. And even so, we are still facing the risk of having to face the shoes of those companies. Because the decision has just been taken now, we don't really know what is going to happen next. And we already call for international solidarity because we know that it's going to happen. Because the companies are always expecting, that's the actions that they take. They take legal actions in order to protect their interest. What I can say is that for the Colombian government, life is more important. So we have decided to prioritize life over the financial interest, the corporate interest, particularly because we are very conscious of the fact that climate change is a reality and that we have to act radically in order to protect the ecosystems and make sure that there is planet for future generations. So yeah, we are. Sorry.
Once this, I mean, this is a political bill, and it's a goal, and it's, I mean, so that it's, I mean, it's kind of strong, but and I assume you have a strategy in case somebody is doing so.
We have an agency that is called the State Agency to Defend the State, and the agency is the one that develops the strategy. So if you would like to know a little bit more details about how the agency strategizes, we can help you with the connection. Thank you.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more round of questions if anyone has anything more to ask. Thank you, and thank you for the panelists for sharing their knowledge and their views. I just have a question with regard to, I'd like to hear from the panelists, especially Nick. What are your views on the inclusion of strong climate change provisions in the ITs or investment agreements? And can those provisions, in your view, assist with limiting, let's say, the risk of ISDS, or even going to domestic courts if there is that avenue available? What would you, I would say this would be a replacement of what we are discussing here, which is phasing out ISDS, but could it work in conjunction, or would that be helpful, especially for developing countries where there's still a perception that you need to be able to attract investments? Okay, thank you. Any more to ask questions? Okay.
Thank you. Excellent question. And I really understand there is a push at the moment to put into BRTs language that will try and limit the ability of ISDS cases to threaten climate policy. One of the problems is these tribunals really are the laws themselves. And we've seen time and time again that no matter how we try to frame the scope of these tribunals, when it actually comes to the case itself, it doesn't make any difference. The arbitrators decide, and they really are the final word on this. They will decide what's relevant and what's not relevant to investment protection. And I suppose it goes to the heart of what I kind of said in my answer there, because my own government in the UK is very in favour of this. It's very in favour of trying to limit the way that ISDS can be used. And we said to them, A, we don't think it's going to be effective, but B, that it's really missing the bigger picture, which I quoted from the UN Special Rapporteur in the last answer, which is there's a problem with a whole series of international laws, which the objective of which is the promotion of investment at all costs. Of course countries want investment, but they want investment because it's going to improve the lives of people, of communities within their countries. But if they lack, as a result of that investment, the ability to regulate sectors of their economy, to tax sectors of their economy, the public good that's supposed to result from that investment is not going to be there. And I think this is something really fundamental to the economy for the last 40 years. The important thing is investment at all costs. And I really think that if what we're doing here is rethinking how our economies work. That's one thing that has to go. One thing that must change. Because what we're saying now is the protection of life, the protection of nature, the protection of our environment is more important than investment at all costs. And I think on the second point, I would just say, of course, countries want to encourage investment, and I understand that. But again, we really see that for most sectors of the economy, this investment protection makes no difference whatsoever. For the many countries across the world want to encourage tourism and to do it in a sustainable way. We've got no evidence that the companies operating in that sector care less about whether it's an investment protection treaty or whether it's an ISDS or not. And increasingly, it is the fossil fuel and mining corporations and their financial assets, not the diversity of investment that many countries across the world. So, for me, we really need to start rethinking, and I think this is a real role that, for example, just transition mechanisms can help us play. If we get it agreed, we really need to start rethinking how investment works and how it can work to keep things right.
Thank you for the question. I think that's the core question. I'm going to answer or try to complement in the context of first the BIT itself. And I think we more or less know now that these are outdated instruments. These were instruments after the Second World War, again, with a very specific objective: protect investment flows from the north to the south. Many of the people I work with, they call this neo-colonialism in the form of instruments. It's the legalization of the new form of exploitation, or dispossession. Okay, but let's just be very technical and go for okay, we believe then that BITs, international investment agreements, will bring investment flows. There is no evidence that actually an investor will look into a country, let's say a Dutch investor to invest in Tanzania, and say, okay, they have a BIT with us. That's the last thing they're going to be looking at. They're looking at political stability, infrastructure, you name it. A financial decision will be made on the basis of many other reasons, but not the BIT. What we do have evidence about is that they use it to actually claim compensation. Nick mentioned it very marginally, but I think we need to emphasize ISDS has become sport. They look into which comes at BIT to pretend to invest, and this is proven. This happened in Colombia. There's mining companies that go and say we're going to do exploration and exploitation of minerals, only to actually eventually create tensions in the communities to have the government shut down the projects, and they use ISDS to say, well, we were about to invest 50 billion, so now we want 50 billion in return because we're supposed to be getting 50 billion in 50 years. So under ISDS, we should pay this. It's so perverse, but we have evidence for that. So BITs, again, is an outdated instrument that doesn't really respond to what DNA and many others have called the most important challenge of our generation. The climate crisis is not necessarily going to be fixed with these instruments. What I can tell you, which is the second aspect of my complement response, is that we've been working in Africa, East Africa, West Africa, where civil societies are now in the process of pushing their governments to turn BITs in European countries, with Canada, with other countries. And what they're saying is, we need investment. We don't need this sort of investment protection mechanism, but also they are going to what kind of investment is needed. And I don't think we should be engaging as much as in BITs, as much as we should be engaging in what is the investment for. And if a BIT is going to be that one, that instrument that we all come up with, and that is the one that is going to guarantee, then so be it. But as of now, there is no interest in European countries that are renegotiating BITs to get rid of the ISDS clause in the new draft text. They do recognize women, and this is very ridiculous to be honest, but they do say, okay, well, actually women have an economic importance in the activities, so we are going to put it in the contract. But they don't have any binding clause that if a company, an investor, does harm to women, they are liable. But they do have a clause that says that if the investors feel that investment is being threatened by women, for example, using the infrastructure of the companies, then they can sue the government for millions and millions of dollars in Washington. Again, just to summarize, instruments are updated. We need a new investment framework in the context of climate action.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask if anybody else on the panel wants to make any contributions on those questions. I'll go one more time if there's one last question from anybody in the audience. Okay. One last question.
Hi, thank you so much.
Hello. Turning things on sometimes. Thank you, Rach, from the Center for International Environmental Law. Thank you all so much for the panel. I really appreciate it. I just have a question if any of the panelists wanted to speak to openings for coordinated plurilateral approaches by states to exit from the ISDS system, to adopt provisions, subsequent agreements that can actually enable states to circumvent and no longer be subject to the system of legal threat for undertaking action in line with their legal obligations. And just to lift up the question that was asked before about the ICJ advisory opinion that I think really is helpful in this context because it clarifies the state's legal duty to regulate, that it's not merely a political option, but a legal duty. So these ISDS cases are actually allowing investors to sue states for taking action that they have a legal duty to undertake to protect the environment and people. So thanks so much.
Okay, good question. Who would like to respond first?
Yeah, thank you for bringing this back to me. Basically, much more of an expert, and that's really useful. But I think the plurilateral move is really important. And we've already said that countries fear repercussions from corporations if they try to exit ISDS and from countries on the other side. So to do it remotely is really important. And that's one reason we want to bring it here. And I'm going to try and work on that over the next year. The other reason that's really important is because there is a way, we believe, and we're working on it through the Energy Charter Treaty, that if countries move together, they can effectively negotiate away the sunset clause. Because the obligations within the investment treaties are between the countries themselves. So if the two countries say, we no longer recognize this, then that is something we believe, I'm sure you have more idea than I do on exactly how it will work. But if that's the case, then that does terminate the fact that you have 20 more years of these cases, because that sunset clause is a major disincentive. Of course it is. The countries taking action. We're still going to face cases 20 years after a democratically elected government has decided they're going to exit these cases. And what we find when a country does that is actually the cases increase. Because companies say, right, I've got 20 years now to do this, so I'm going to put in my claims. So I think that's really important. I want to find you reminded me of this idea of like your ISDS become sport. But actually it has become speculative financial activity. And so ISDS cases now attract third-party investment that allows the ISDS case to continue beyond what the original company involved in the contract will be able to take forward. On the speculative basis, you're effectively going to have an award at some point which will be monetized. Speculative asset class. That's a crazy business. I mean, that's how far we have moved away from any kind of notion. If you've ever there before, any kind of notion that this is kind of genuine compensation for a harm caused to an economic entity.
I have a question for you, or for the table as well. Is here at the COP, maybe you already addressed maybe I lose it, but in this week that we have with the COP 30, is it, do you envisage space in which we could bring together different countries' delegations to discuss this? And how do we manage that? For instance, well, or what is being organized as to bring together other countries that could be interested in this issue? What are you doing for them?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're trying to do. This is the beginning, essentially. So that's very much what we'd like to try and do. And of course, I think it's, obviously, I'm not a party to the UNFCCC, but I think it would be incredibly helpful if the UNFCCC were to explicitly call out the problem of ISDS for climate action, because I think that would help bring countries together and it would help reduce some of the fear and caution that they've got. But in order to get that, we have to do some of the networking and mobilization with countries themselves. And we've tried to do it a little bit in advance of this side event, but we actually need to redouble our efforts so the next time, who knows, we don't know where it will be next time. Brazil doesn't have any ISDS, so it's a nice reason why we decided to do the side event this year. It could be in a country next year that is also moving away from ISDS as a system, which maybe gives us that opportunity in the year ahead to bring those governments together. So next year we'll be able to speak out more forcefully on it.
It is very important to go a little bit to the basics, and the basics is this ISDS system is embedded in free trade agreements. Free trade, an agreement between two countries to lower tariffs and talk about how they can facilitate the exchange of goods and services. Fast forward, they started adding chapters to this free trade agreement, and one of the chapters is investment protection, investment facilitation. This wasn't the case, but modern free trade agreements, 99% of them will include an investment chapter, and there the ISDS clause will come. Yeah. In addition to that, we have BITs. So this is it's a big system. People working against ISDS actually we barely looked into the COP because we're working against free trade agreements and investment deals in different policy spaces. For example, the WTO. For example, the UN, the UNCTAD. But then, last year, for the first time, three of the not so good friends, namely the World Bank, the FMI, and the WTO, announced at the COP a World Trade Day. And what they were saying is, trade, more open markets is the solution for climate change. We were flabbergasted. Because what they say is we need to continue our agenda of opening more markets, and that means, like, for example, pushing Brazil, Colombia, Mexico to, for example, stop government procurement, to open governments to actually put everything on the market, so big corporations, big tech, everyone can compete in local markets. We know how that goes. That's the agenda they are pushing, and they brought it to the COP because they believe that more trade, the same trade we know is causing climate change, is the solution for climate change. And that's when we decided to come to the COP. This is why it's also very relevant to say this is the first or second time we have ISDS on this event, because we know they are ignoring ISDS. Now, to your question, it is increasingly difficult to become together in the context of countries against ISDS, but that is the work we are doing. This is why we are here. I think we just need to see the relevance and also build a narrative. Because as you can see, ISDS, raise your hands, how many of you knew that your countries may have a bilateral investment treaty with a European country since the 80s or the 90s? And those ones have ISDS. It's a very obscure system. So I think the narrative is also important. And I think your question, that's where we want to go. And we are not against investment. This is very important. This is not from me, it comes from our policy initiative, by the way. The investment is in Africa. What we don't need is all of these rights given to the investors above the democracy and the sovereignty of our countries.
Well, thank you very much. So we're close now, so I just wanted to ask you to join me in thanking all of the panelists that have spoken today, and also thank you to you for coming along to listen to this. And we need to move forward if next year we have a range of governments as we are in on these panels talking against ISDS. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.